So, ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with our keynote speaker, let me briefly explain this subtitle, Nazi Perverted Science. It reminds us that Nazi crimes were enabled not only by political power and military violence, but also by the distortion of science, medicine, and academic authority. We will hear a lot more about that later on from our keynote speaker. But this is why the legacy of Nuremberg matters. It affirmed that responsibility extends beyond political leaders to professionals and institutions. It is therefore especially fitting that our keynote speaker addresses this intersection of Nuremberg's legal legacy and the ideological corruption of science and medicine. Distinguished guests, it is now my great honor and special privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Dr. Gideon Greif. His presence here today, it's his first time in Maribor, and I think also first time in Slovenia. So his presence here is a great distinction for our university and, of course, also for this symposium. Professor Greif, for those who have not heard about him yet, is an internationally respected historian of Jewish history and the Holocaust, and one of the most recognized scholars in the field of Holocaust research. Over many years, his work has made a major contribution to the historical understanding of Nazi crimes, the experience of victims and survivors, and the broader moral and historical questions that continue to shape Holocaust memory. He's a professor of Jewish history at Ono Academic College in Israel, professor at the Center for Peace and Development, University in Belgrade. He serves as chief historian at the Shem Olam Institute for Holocaust Studies in Israel, as well as the Foundation for Holocaust Educational Projects in Miami, United States. At a time when the legacy of Holocaust and the meaning of accountability remain urgently relevant, Professor Greif's work reminds us why serious scholarship, moral clarity, and historical responsibility are indispensable. Professor Greif, we are deeply honored to have you here with us today. Welcome to Alma Mater, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this lovely introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enough patience. I've prepared a long speech. It will take exactly 5 hours and 20 minutes. Don't be afraid. 45 minutes sharp, I was instructed. I'm really happy to be here for the first time in my life in Slovenia and especially in Maribor. Now to the written text. Distinguished representatives of the academic community, esteemed colleagues, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a profound privilege to address you today here in Maribor, Slovenia. I extend my sincere gratitude to the organizing institutions, especially to Professor Daniel Sitter, who invited me, and to everyone who made this gathering possible, and for the opportunity to speak on a subject of such historical weight and enduring moral significance. I'm especially grateful to engage with an audience that brings together scholars, students, researchers, members of the public, and representatives of the media. The diversity and attentiveness of those present reflects the continuing importance of furious academic reflection on the most difficult chapter of our shared past, and unfortunately also the present when I'm thinking about the second biggest party in Germany, Alternative für Deutschland, which is explicit a Nazi party. The topic, dear friends, that brings us together today, the Nuremberg trials 8 years later, major German Nazi war crimes trial, is not only a matter of historical inquiry. It stands at the intersection of law, of history, of ethics, and collective memory. We Jews are good in remembering. Next month we are celebrating Pesach, Passover, which did not happen 2 years ago, not 200 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and we still remember. remember the destruction of First Temple, of Second Temple, happy and non-happy events. And I think it's good for the nation never to forget anything. The questions raised by the crimes of German Nazi regime and by the efforts to prosecute those crimes have lost none of their urgency, even not today, February 2026. On the contrary, as time passes and eyewitnesses disappear, unfortunately, we live in a world in which every day in Israel, at least 40 survivors of the Holocaust die. Every day, every day. The responsibility of scholarship, of documentation, and the legal reflection becomes even greater. And therefore, I repeat, this conference is so important. Thank you. Even today, ladies and gentlemen, jurisdictional authorities, historians, and investigative bodies continue the effort to identify, document, and, where possible, prosecute individuals who participated in Nazi crimes. I myself was an expert witness to the Hanning trial 5 years ago in Paderborn, Germany, in which Hanning was sentenced to 6 years because of his crimes as a guard, as a Wachmann in Auschwitz-Birkenau, prosecuted for 6 years in prison, but they are all clever, these bastards. He did himself a favor and died 2 days before he entered prison, so he will never sit even 1 second. Many of the accused are now of advanced age, and each new case raises complex legal, ethical, and social questions. Yet, these proceedings are not merely symbolic. No, they are not. They affirm a fundamental principle that crimes of such magnitude do not expire. There is no Schlussstrich, as many Germans want to hear. No, 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 1,000 times no. And that accountability remains a cornerstone of the rule of law, regardless of the passage of time. Criminals have to be punished. Dot. At the same time, ladies and gentlemen, these late trials of nowadays, even today, they are dealing with it in Arolsen, in Germany, in Ludwigsburg. It demonstrates that the history of German Nazi crimes is not closed, especially not for the survivors. We still have in Israel about 175,000 survivors of the Holocaust. But as I mentioned, 40 less every day, 7 days a week. It remains a part of our contemporary reality, not only as memory, but as a living field of legal, practical, and jurisdictional interpretation. Each investigation and each verdict contributes to a growing body of case law that continues to shape our understanding of individual responsibility within systems of mass violence, dictatorships, etc. Unfortunately, even today, 21st century, we still have dictatorships in some countries all over the world. In this sense, the long pursuit of justice after 1945 is not merely retrospective. It provides essential legal and moral guidance for the present and especially for the future. Although 8 years have now passed, the Nuremberg trials were more than a series of court proceedings. They were, but they were much more. They marked a turning point in the history of law and in the moral consciousness of the international community. For the first time, leading representatives of a state were held personally accountable before an international tribunal for crimes committed in the name of that state, in this case, Nazi Germany. The principles established there continue to shape international criminal law, historical research, and, more important, our understanding of responsibility to this very day. Yet, the story did not end in Nuremberg Over the past 80 years, courts in many countries have continued to investigate, to prosecute, and to judge perpetrators of Nazi crimes. This long judicial process raises national and international fundamental questions about law, memory, responsibility, and the meaning of justice across generations. We gather today, therefore, not only to remember history, which is important, but to examine how justice confronted unprecedented evil. Maybe we can see some footage, some photos. I have prepared a very big presentation, like the speech. I would like to share with you some of the visual materials I have prepared for today's conference. Here. Good. Thank you very much. Almost without explanations, you see the results of German Nazi crimes all over Europe. Horrible to look, but we have no choice. I'm sorry for this horrible sight. This is Buchenwald, by the way, a few days after liberation. And if you manage to identify the person in the second row, it's Nobel Prize winner Elie Wiesel, who passed away 3 years ago. Buchenwald, a few days after liberation. And one of his colleagues, I can't show you now, is still alive, Mr. Krauss in Israel. So some documentation, der Reichsführer SS, Himmler, everything you know. We won't elaborate on this as an introduction, of course. And of course, the secret of the Geneva contract, Germany. And this is Raphael Lemkin, the Jewish lawyer whose definition of genocide was accepted by the United Nations in 1948, still valid. Raphael Lemkin himself, a Holocaust survivor. Here, the signing of the genocide law on August 8, 1948. Very important day. And the first war crimes trials in the Soviet Union took place already during the war, 1943-44. Some documentary, some footage with severe verdicts. And the first extermination camp trial was held already during World War II in December 44 against the Majdanek criminals held here in the Soviet Union. You see the results. Majdanek extermination, the second big one with almost 200,000 victims. This is what the Soviets found a few days after liberation. This is an aerial photo of Majdanek with the car. And the judges, 1944, a very early trial. Okay, I will show you more later. The time allows. At the same time, these late trials about which I was talking demonstrate that history of German Nazi crimes is not closed. It remains part of our contemporary reality, not only as memory, but as a living field of legal practice and jurisdictional interpretation, especially when we hear every day how big Nazi attraction is in Germany, especially in the part which was there. Each investigation and each verdict contributes to a growing body of case law that continues to shape our understanding of individual responsibility with this system of mass violence. Although 80 years have now passed, the Nuremberg trials were more than a series of court proceedings. They marked a turning point in the history of law and the moral consciousness of the international community. Yet the story did not end in Nuremberg, and over the past 80 years, there were many, many more. The defeat of Nazi Germany did not merely reveal a defeated regime. It revealed a system of destruction, of murder, of torture, of starvation, and especially of humiliation, whose scale, organization, and ideological foundation had no precedent. No precedent. What the Allied force encountered in the liberated camps, in the mass graves, like in Bergen-Belsen, the British, and in the archives of ministries and offices, was not simply evidence of war crimes in the traditional sense. It was evidence of a project of industrialized, bureaucratically organized mass murder, a system designed to eliminate entire population. Auschwitz, Majdanek, Belzec, Sobibor, Chelmno, Treblinka were modern factories of death. The only product which was manufactured there was human ashes. The immediate question that arose was therefore not only who had committed these horrible crimes, but something far more fundamental. How does a legal system judge crimes that have no historical precedents? How do we do it? How does one measure guilt when the crime itself transcends all previous categories of wrongdoing? Another question, how does one construct justice in the aftermath of a catastrophe carried out with the full administrative, technological, and organizational capacity of a modern state? Good questions. The crimes committed by German Nazi regime were not spontaneous acts of violence. No, they weren't. Even the Reichskristallnacht, which was described as Zorn der Bevölkerung, was very well planned in advance. We know it to the last detail. My grandfather, Dr. Karl Danziger in Hindenburg, was a direct victim. Then he was arrested in Buchenwald, and 5 months later he could leave Nazi Germany and come to the land of Israel. Deportations were scheduled to the last detail. We have the train plan bringing Jews to Treblinka, and if it's written the train will arrive at 14:02, it will be there punctually, believe me. Property was inventoried. Victims were counted. Killing facilities were engineered for efficiency. Yes, the Germans are very efficient. Death itself became a process. This raises a second, equally difficult question, ladies and gentlemen. How does one prosecute industrialized mass murder? We have no precedents, no experience. Traditional criminal law had developed to address individual acts, a killing, an assault, a theft, an assassination. It assumed a direct relationship between perpetrator and victim, between action and the consequence. But the machinery of destruction created by the Nazi regime deliberately fragmented responsibility. Decisions were made in offices far from the killing sites. Orders passed through multiple levels of hierarchy. Befehl ist Befehl, as the Germans say. Tasks were divided into administrative functions. Each participant could claim to have performed only a limited role. This is exactly what Adolf Eichmann claimed in Jerusalem in 1961 when he said, "I just followed orders." He didn't help him at the end, he was hanged, but that's what he claimed. Let us make another break. Let me show you more photos. Good, here is the Nuremberg trial, the famous picture with Göring, Hess, not the commander of Auschwitz, the vice chancellor, Führer, and all the other criminals, Kaltenbrunner, first from the right. Here they are from another angle. Hess is sleeping. He's not interested in what's going on there. Here they are, Nuremberg 1946, Göring, who committed suicide a few moments before being hanged. here in his cell. He was so clever. Here he is after his committing suicide. I was just following orders is not an excuse. Here is the International Criminal Court. And now see the second criminal trial against the medical doctor. You mentioned in your introduction the involvement of intellectuals, of medical doctors in the horrible crime. Here are the really horrible medical doctors. No one of us would like to be treated by such cruel people. Second from left is the personal medical doctor of Hitler, Dr. Karl Brandt, who was hanged after the Nuremberg trials. And the only medical woman is Dr. Hertha Oberheimer. Here she is below, second from below. Here again, photos from the Nuremberg trial. Here she is. And the witnesses showing the results of the crimes of people who studied 7 years in the best universities in Heidelberg, in Breslau, in München, in Frankfurt, and still did such crimes. Here is Dr. Karl Brandt, the main doctor of Adolf Hitler. Here he is, few seconds before being hanged in Nuremberg. And then followed the judge's trial. Here is the main beast who was luckily killed in a bombing of the United States in 1945 in Berlin, and his colleagues who were just assassinators, not judges. This is the judge trial, 1947. This is the Soviet prosecutor. And we had organizations. The whole German Nazi state was directly involved. So we have a lot of footage showing the series, a large series of trials around Nuremberg. Here, the Pole and industrialist trials. We have a lot of books about this. This is Mr. Pole, the responsible for recruitment of slaves. And very interesting is the IG Farben trial, which also was part of these trials. They got very slight punishments. They had a center in Auschwitz called Buna Monowitz, where they had thousands of slaves who got no salary, nothing but beatings, insults, and then they were all murdered. Here, Himmler visiting Buna Monowitz in 1943. Prisoners walking from the working place in Buna Monowitz back to their barracks. This is Buna Monowitz from inside. It's still there, it still exists, but privatized. Here we have the trial of the industrialists. And of course, the involvement of academic world, the Goethe University in Frankfurt am Main, and other scholars. And then we had the High Command trial and many, many, many others. I don't have enough time. How much time is left, Daniel? Wow, 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 my God. Each participant in such horrible crimes could claim to have performed only a limited role. That's what Adolf Eichmann said, and his lawyer, Dr. Robert Servatius, supported it, of course, in Jerusalem. In such a system, the structure itself was designed to dissolve individual accountability. And this is the danger. This leads to one of the central dilemmas of post-war justice. How do you assign responsibility within a system built to diffuse guilt from the beginning, from the very beginning? If a train official schedules deportations, let's say to Majdanek, is this person responsible for the death that follow? Yes or no? If a clerk prepares transport lists, and there were thousands, is he or she accountable for the fate of those included in the list? Serious questions. If a clerk prepares, yes, this I read. If an engineer designs crematoria, Top von Söhne from Erfurt, does technical work become participation in murder? I'm often asked, did they know what they are planning? I think they did. And the suppliers of the Cyclone B gas once made a horrible mistake. They forgot that they have to hide the real essence of the dispatch. So the one time they wrote for the usage of the gas chambers, they didn't repeat it anymore. They wanted the money, of course. And if a minister in the Nazi German government signs a decree, how far does the chain of responsibility extend? Good questions. At the center of this problem, ladies and gentlemen, stands the figure later described as the Schreibtischtäter, the desk perpetrator. Adolf Eichmann, by the way, was not a Schreibtischtäter. He himself left his luxurious office in Berlin, listen, for at least 13 times. He went to Auschwitz-Birkenau to see that everything is functioning perfectly. 13 times at least. And his boss, Heinrich Himmler, chef of SS, went there at least, according to my investigation, 5 to 6 times personally. Not the person who pulled the trigger or opened the gas valve, but the official who organized transports, allocated resources, coordinated statistics, and ensured administrative efficiency. He worked with files, with numbers, memoranda. He did not see the victims. He did not touch them. Yet, without his work, the system could never function. More photos. This is the Reichstag bombarded. You see a lot of trials. We don't have enough time. Ritter von Lieb, Sperle, Küchler, Generaloberst Johannes Blaskowitz, and many, so many criminals. Millions of criminals. Mostly German, Austrian, and we should never forget their collaborators. And very interesting is the Einsatzgruppen trial, which was the first chapter in the so-called final solution, the Entlösung der Judenfrage. It took place 47-48, and you may remember that the mass shooting in the areas, open areas in the Soviet Union was just the introduction to the later invention of the gas chambers in Auschwitz, Treblinka, Majdanek, Sobibor, Belgrade. So there was a special trial against the Einsatzgruppen perpetrators, which were active in 3 sections: Einsatzgruppe A, Einsatzgruppe B, Einsatzgruppe C, and the last one, Einsatzgruppe D, arresting Jews for slavery. Here, a few minutes before being shot in the field, here they are asked to prepare their own graves. So it's not only a crime, it's accompanied by sadism, by cruelty, mere cruelty. Here they are preparing their own graves, few seconds before being shot. So we talk about a huge crime which is characterized by a horrible cruelty. This is, by the way, a very famous photo. Recently, just 2 weeks ago, the identity of the Einsatzgruppen member who is shooting was discovered. I forgot the name. It's the city of Vinica, nowadays Ukraine. And again, look at the cruelty. The Jewish community is already dead in the pit, and they found somewhere, maybe he was hiding, the last Jew. This is also the title of the photo, the last Jew in Vinica. He has to be photographed, documented, and within few minutes he will lie dead with all comrades, maybe family members, in this pit. So we have another. Ohlendorf was one of the 4 commanders of the Einsatzgruppen. Here he is, very elegant with his suit. Why not? Very happy. And Braune and all other nice people. Paul Blobel was the head of the unit which went from one side of killing to the other to discover whether some bones are left not to be evidence for the future if Germany will be asked one day where are the victims, he was responsible for removing all the evidence. Paul Blobel. Here he is during the trial. Oh, we have so many. I need much time. Next time, give me please more time. Okay. How should such a criminal be judged? Is physical proximity to violence the defining element of guilt? Or does responsibility extend to those who made the crime possible, efficient, and sustainable? The problem becomes even more complex when we consider the role of professional authorities. Consider the physician in a concentration or extermination camp, a doctor. A doctor, a figure traditionally associated with healing, medicines, hospitals, stands on a rival ramp, die alte jüdische Rampe, die neue jüdische Rampe, with a gesture of the hand. He determines who will live and who will send immediately to the gas chambers. Is this one of the duties of a doctor? I don't think so. In a single day, such a physician might select hundreds or thousands for death. I was last week at my doctor's office. He didn't send me to the gas chambers, thanks God. How should the law assess such actions? In traditional criminal law, murder is judged as an international killing of an individual. But what if one decision results in the death of hundreds or thousands? What if such selections were repeatedly daily over months or years? The selections in Auschwitz are more or less connected to Joseph Mengele, but we should not forget there were 21 medical doctors standing day and night on the ramp in Auschwitz-Birkenau, selecting patients for death and or life. Here they are. The most famous early trial was, of course, against the commander of Auschwitz, Rudolf Höss. By the way, I'm in contact with one of his sons. I met him 2 weeks ago in Freiburg in Germany. He is a person of the church. He has also 3 other sons. 47, Poland. Here he is, the good father, the good husband, the loving parent, with his boss, Heinrich Himmler. Here he is, Rudolf Höss. After his arrest, doesn't look so happy, I think. And here the trial, Commandant von Auschwitz, his kingship, Birkenau, here during his trial in Poland, and few seconds before being hanged in the most symbolic place possible, few steps from the entrance to the gas chamber of Auschwitz Stammlager, the first gas chamber of the camp. There he was hanged. The gallows still stands there if you happen to visit. Here he's taken the same steps. And here, the last seconds of life. So in this case, justice was made. How much time do I have? 10 minutes, good. Do you have questions? You know, questions allow the speaker to drink something, so please. I'll give you another chance. Can punishment of what we see here reflect the magnitude of harm when the harm is beyond any human measure? I know personally hundreds of Auschwitz survivors. They will never leave Auschwitz mentally. I asked Jacob Silberberg, a survivor of the Sonderkommando, Jacob, when did you leave Auschwitz? He told me, I will never forget it. Gideon, I never left Auschwitz. I'm still there. And he told it to me as a free citizen of the state of Israel. He's still there in his dreams, imagination. Physically, he is in the Middle East, but not mentally. The law requires evidence, intent, and demonstrate participation. Moral judgment may extend further. Entire professions participated in the functioning of the German Nazi system. Administrators, lawyers, judges, medical doctors, engineers, industrial managers. Many acted within formal legality as defined by the regime. Many could claim their actions were authorized, required, even legally mandated. Where does legal guilt end? And where does moral responsibility begin? I think this stands in the center of our discussion in this important conference. Another question: can obedience to state authority mitigate personal responsibility? Can legality within a criminal regime serve as a defense in a trial? Is participation in an unjust system itself a crime, even if the individual actions appear routine? And they were in most cases routine. More photos. This is Erich Bauer, the vice commander of Sobibor. Here he's in West Berlin, 1950. East Germany is a special story. We don't have time to elaborate on this. We were not Nazis. They were Nazis. They're in the West. And special cases like Joseph Blösche, who is the man who arrested this sweet young Jewish boy, very famous photo. Blösche is the person holding the gun on the right side. For many years there were questions, who was this person? Now it's sure, it's Blösche. Here he is. And this is the commander of the unit who put an end to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, April 1943, General von Stroop. And of course, the impact of the Cold War, West and East. You know this nice gentleman who became a very important citizen of the United States of America, beloved by President Kennedy. And we had the Allied military trials in the British zone and the Bergen-Belsen trial, which was extremely important. This is what the British saw at the beginning of their entrance, the last surviving prisoners, and the gratitude of being liberated. Since we have very few minutes, I would like to conclude. Is okay? All the rest in the next conference. Where is my conclusion? Here it is. Distinguished friends, the response to German Nazi crimes contributed to a broader transformation of the international legal order. The UN, the United Nations creation in 1945, reflected a new framework for cooperation and dignity. Though it did not conduct Nuremberg, its General Assembly affirmed Nuremberg principles in 1946, recognizing them as principle of international law. Codification followed. Genocide, introduced by Raphael Lemkin, which I have mentioned, was formalized in the 1948 Genocide Convention. Crimes against humanity were further developed as widespread or systematic attacks against civilians. Sovereignty gradually ceased to function as an absolute shield when states commit mass atrocities. Political tensions limited enforcement during the Cold War. No permanent court existed for decades. Yet, normative development continued through human rights instruments, conventions, and jurisprudence. At the end of the 20th century, Nuremberg legacy became operational again through ad hoc tribunals, 1993, 1994, etc., etc., etc. We don't have enough time. So let me conclude by following sentences. What are the lessons 80 years after? What justice has achieved and what it has not achieved? But before, to show you more photos. Bergen-Belsen removing the bodies, They did it so quickly, too quickly, the British. And very symbolic, they forced the SS women, to be more accurate, the Aufseherinnen, to collect the bodies of their victims and to put it into the truck. Here we see, these are the German Aufseherinnen, cruel women, horrible cruel women, not less than the men, sometimes even more. Well, can't look at it. This is the commander of Bergen-Belsen, arrested by the British, taken to custody. And this is Irma Grese. My God, cruel people, here she is. How a Girl Became a Beast, a good title. And we had the Neuengamme trials. In Neuengamme, 20 Jewish children were hanged by the medical doctors in order not to be identified after the war. And we have the Ravensbrück trials with a lot of perpetrators, with a lot of women. And we had the US military commission trials in Dachau. And we still are in the 40s. So I have hundreds of photos more to show you, but time runs out. So 80 years of trials allow conclusions that are neither simple nor unambiguous. The response was extensive but incomplete, persistent but uneven, principled but shaped by political and social realities. One major achievement is the sustained affirmation of individual responsibility within a collective system. This is important. Mass crimes do not dissolve accountability into bureaucracy. Over decades, jurisprudence increasingly recognized functional roles, administrators, logisticians, guards, whose work enabled the whole apparatus. A second achievement is the relationship between law and historical truth. Courts are not historical institutes. Yet, trials preserved evidence, created factual records, and countered denial. The documentary method at Nuremberg and survivor testimony in later trials, Eichmann process, Demjanjuk, a trial in Israel and in Germany, in München, established public authoritative findings. A third achievement, ladies and gentlemen, is persistence. The refusal to let time become impunity. Legal developments, such as the removal of limitations periods for the gravest crimes and doctrinal shifts towards systematic participation, underscores that responsibility does not expire, never. At the same time, limitations are structural. Courts judge individuals, not entire societies. They cannot restore what was destroyed, unfortunately. They cannot bring us back 6 million Jews who brutally were murdered. At that time, 1/3 of the Jewish people, 1/3. They cannot create proportionality to millions of victims. Evidence and procedure constrain what can be proven. And many perpetrators were never tried. According to my researchers, not more than 2% of the criminals were brought to trial. 2%. 98 will die in their beds, rich and happy. Timing matters. Delays could be experienced by survivors as a form of secondary injustice, I would say second murder. Yet, late trials still affirm a necessity principle. The Germans were the greatest murderers in history. Yes, they were. And in addition, they were also the greatest robbers in history. They gave back until now approximately 17% of the fortune they have robbed. 17%, not more, not 18, 17. Nazi Germany is responsible for the deaths of about 60 million people between the years 1933 and 45. 60 million, including 6 million Jews, about 1/3 of the Jewish people. Question: did the Germans pay the price for their crimes? I leave it open. A retrospective look at the totality of the trials of the criminals and the Germans, we saw some on the line, Austrians and their collaborators, paints a bleak and very sad picture. Only about 2%, to be more accurate, 1%, 57, of the thousands of perpetrators of the Holocaust and World War II were brought to justice for their actions. The vast majority of them died in their beds, happy and wealthy, without remorse or pangs of conscience. They didn't have. It is the victims who paid and still continue to pay the price every day until their deaths. As Jacob Silberberg said, I'm still in Auschwitz. While the criminals elegantly and cunningly evade justice. This is not just a failure of the justice system. It's a failure of all of us, of all humanity, which showed mercy and empathy for those who committed horrific crimes, who humiliated, tortured, and murdered millions of people in cold blood, and were convinced that they would never pay for their actions. None of them. Sadly, they were right. I chose to summarize with an ancient Talmudic saying. Please note, whoever is merciful to the cruel, in the end, becomes cruel to the merciful. It's by Rabbi Elazar, Midrash Tanchuma. In modern terms, he who shows mercy to criminals, in the end, prepares the ground for the next human disaster. The trials themselves now belong to history. Many perpetrators are no longer alive, like the survivors. They die. Many survivors are no longer with us. But the questions raised in 1945, the topic of our conference, have not disappeared. How do we respond to mass violence? How do we assign responsibility within complex systems? How do we preserve truth in the face of denial or distortion? In brackets, even in this region, you know what I mean. And how do we ensure that principles established after catastrophes remain effective in preventing future crimes? These questions remain with us. The legacy of Nuremberg is therefore not only a chapter of the past. No, it isn't. It is a framework for the present and a responsibility for the future. Thank you for your attention.